A few years ago, my anxiety was already riding high, but it spiraled out of control when I started hearing noises outside my bedroom window. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was the wind or an animal. But night after night, the sounds continued. Every time, I'd wake my parents, begging them to check it out. They never found anything. Eventually, I started to doubt myself, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me, or if I was just subconsciously seeking attention. But one morning, my grandfather discovered something that made my blood run cold. One of our lawn chairs had been dragged beneath our bathroom window. It was an odd placement. The window pane was fogged, offering little visibility, but the thought of someone moving it there unsettled me. I pushed it to the back of my mind. Maybe it was just a coincidence. The noises returned the next night. Again, nothing outside. But the night after that, we made a discovery that confirmed my worst fears. Outside my window stood a small stepladder, positioned just far enough back for someone to comfortably sit on it while looking through the blinds. And on my windowsill, a bag of cold McDonald's food. The burger was untouched, the fries half-eaten. Someone had been sitting there, quietly watching me in my room, long enough for their food to go cold. The police were called. They looked around but didn't find anyone. No leads, no resolution. I felt crazier than ever. Even though the evidence was undeniable, someone had been there. What chilled me the most was the thought of how long they'd been doing this without me knowing. I tried to fight back in small ways. I sewed my curtains together to block the view, thinking it would at least make it harder for them to spy on me. The following night, the noise came again. This time, I couldn't stay inside. I ran out to confront whatever was out there. But as usual, there was nothing. Then things escalated. The next morning, we found handprints and shoe prints on top of our garbage can, which had been dragged near the air conditioning unit. It was clear they'd climbed on top of it to peer into my window from above. The holes in my screen were new, too. We found a sharpened stick nearby. They'd been trying to cut the screen away piece by piece. This wasn't random. This was planned, calculated. By the third night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was lying in bed when I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel beneath my window. My heart dropped. I let out a small, fake groan as if I were stirring in my sleep, then rolled out of view. Quietly, I pressed myself against the wall and crept out of my room, careful not to make a sound. I went straight to my parents' room, where I whispered that someone was definitely outside my window. This wasn't a false alarm. My parents sprang into action. They got dressed, grabbed their shoes, and crept to the back door. I ran to the bathroom and climbed onto the edge of the tub so I could watch through the window. The back door flew open, and my parents burst into the yard, screaming obscenities into the night. And that's when I saw him. A man bolted from his perch on the garbage can, stumbling down the driveway. "You sick freak," my mom screamed. "You motherfucker. Get back here," my dad bellowed, charging after him. The man ran across the street, hiding behind a house. The audacity of this guy. He even peeked out from behind the house, watching us as we stood in the driveway. We called the cops again, praying they'd finally catch him. But by the time they arrived, he'd vanished, likely hopping a fence or sneaking through another yard. I thought that would be the end of it. He'd been scared off, right? Wrong. For weeks after, I still heard noises. Winter came, and there was no way anyone was out there, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It haunted me, even though I never saw him again. What truly shattered me, though, was finding out he'd moved on. Down the street, there were two little girls. He managed to climb through their window one night, and their dad caught him standing in the room, watching them sleep. I don't even want to think about what his intentions were. Thankfully, their dad scared him off, but as far as I know, he was never caught. It could have been so much worse, and I'm thankful it wasn't. But it messed me up. I don't trust anyone in my neighborhood anymore. I've been chased home, approached by strangers in cars, and watched too many times to count. The scars from that time haven't faded. I avoid windows. I keep my lights off. I second-guess every sound I hear in the night. It may not seem like a huge deal to some, but it left a mark on me that won't ever fully heal. It started out as a seemingly normal morning at 7-Eleven. I was grabbing some coffee when I noticed a guy smiling at me from across the counter. At first, I didn't think much of it. It happens sometimes, right? Then he started talking to me. He said he thought he knew a friend of mine, throwing out a generic name like Matt or Chris. He mentioned he'd been in an accident years ago and was mentally challenged as a result. I was young and naive at the time, and against my better judgment, I gave him my number. I figure, what's the harm? Big mistake. Before I even got home, less than 10 minutes later, he texted me. "You're so pretty," he wrote. "I can't stop thinking about you. We should hang out." That kind of intensity should have been a red flag, but instead, I foolishly replied, "Sure, I have to go to Borders tomorrow. Want to come along?" The next day, we met up, and it was awkward. Afterward, he started texting me constantly. At first, it seemed harmless, generic getting to know you questions. I didn't think much of it, but after a week or so, I realized something felt off. His texts became more obsessive, even though we'd only met up that one time. He started saying things like, "I'm in love with you. I can't stop thinking about you." It was way too much, way too fast. I told him I'd met someone else and wasn't interested. That's when things took a turn for the worse. He became clingy, almost desperate. When I told him to stop texting me and leave me alone, he wouldn't take no for an answer. A few days later, I was hanging out at home with a friend when he texted me, "Okay, I'll wait." Wait? I was confused. Then I passed by the bay window in my living room and froze. There he was, parked outside my house. I hadn't told him where I lived. I hadn't told him my last name. There was no way he should have been able to find me. My friend and I were both shaken. I texted him, pretending it was my friend who saw him. "You're creeping her out. Leave now." He apologized and said he'd leave, but instead of driving off, he backed his car down the street and parked behind some trees. I texted again, angrier this time. "She's still watching you. Leave, or I'm calling the cops." He replied, "It's a public street. You can't stop me." By this point, I'd had enough. I called some guy friends over for backup and told him they'd make him leave if he didn't go voluntarily. Finally, he left, but the text didn't stop. I blocked his number, and he started texting me from new ones. He even changed his number multiple times just to get around being blocked. Each time, the messages were the same. "I still love you. I can't stop thinking about you." Months later, he resurfaced again, right when I was pregnant and engaged. That was my breaking point. I called the police, filed a report, and let him know in no uncertain terms that if he ever contacted me again, I'd consider it a threat against me and my family. My fiancée stepped in too, threatening him directly. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he finally disappeared from my life. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far this guy went to insert himself into my life. What started as a chance encounter turned into a nightmare of obsessive texts, stalking, and threats to my sense of safety. Even though it's been years since I've heard from him, the scars are still there. I'm always hyper-aware of my surroundings, always looking over my shoulder. It's not something you just forget.